tonight I just want to share with you a little journey in my own experience. I was, I believe, in the second grade, and I was in school, and it was a 2-room school. We had 66 kids. A mom and a wife, or a mom and a husband were doing the school. He was the principal, and she was with the lower grades. He was kind of a stern, grumpy guy, so I was glad to be in the little room and not with the big kids. My sister was up there, and she didn't appreciate him as much as I appreciated his wife. But she was a sweet, kind-hearted, loving lady, and I remember she came up one day as I was eating lunch, and she sat down beside me while I was eating my homemade bread. My mom made bread that was really durable. As I grew up later, I always would tease her about we could hide behind it in times of war. And her sandwiches were never very moist. I called them Sahara sandwiches. But in this sandwich, there was a nice big thick slab of good old Wisconsin American cheddar cheese. And dear Mrs. Bissell came up and she sat down and she was very quiet. She didn't mention it to any of the other students. Nobody heard it but me. And she said, "Do you know that you might be a better student and you might feel better if your mom didn't send you cheese to school? You might have a better experience in school." And I'm like, "Why?" She said, "Well, you know who Mrs. White is?" And I'm like, "Yeah." She actually mentioned this in her writings, that you'd probably be better off without that. So maybe you might mention that to your mom. Do you think you could do that? She's very sweet and kind about it, not condemning it at all. I didn't feel anything about it other than curiosity. So when I went home, I said, "Mom, do you know what Mrs. Bissell said to me today? She said that it might be better if we didn't have cheese in our lunches when we came to school." And my mom was not very responsive. She kind of was bigger than her 5'2" stature right then. She was really unhappy about that whole thing. And she said, "Oh, she's a city woman. She really doesn't know." She said, "She doesn't know anything about how cheese was made." And at the time, we were living in a remodeled old cheese factory. So we knew all about cheese, you know? A lot of the old cheese-making equipment was still out in the barn. And I said, "So what's her point of ignorance, Mom?" And she said, "Well, you see, back in the old days when the cheese was made, the guys went out through the community dairies and they would pick up the cans of the milk and they would bring it here and they would run through the circle right here with their wagons, and then they would bring it all in, and you know, the horses would poop on the yard and whatever else in the driveway and whatnot, and then they would walk around in that with their boots and they'd haul it in and they'd pour it in the vats, and then they would climb into the vats with their poopy boots and they'd walk around in there and stir things up." And yes, that'd be why Ellen White said not to do that, because it was really unsanitary. But today we have iodine and chlorine, and we have stainless steel and hygienic processes for making the cheese. And I'm like, oh, wow, boy, I thought I was going to have drier sandwiches yet. Just dry old hard bread, man, I wasn't looking forward to that. And I'm like, oh, man, I am so glad you brought me up to speed, Mom. And I was satisfied with that for my life for years. And I left it there. I decided what I ate was my business, and I didn't care what the sweet little lady told me. And Ellen White didn't know anything about modern times, and we're good. Years later, having left the church as a teenager and kicking and screaming all the way back, the Lord finally got me back inside of His arms and started to love me a little bit. And He put people in my path who began to share things with me. And it became apparent that God had a better way, and I really wanted to follow His ways. And so I really began to study. And one day, the Holy Spirit put it in my mind that I probably should study into this a little bit because it was bothering me just a little bit. My wife had gone to a camp meeting, and I was home, and a doctor who was an allergist by this name of Sang Lee had come, and he was talking about how people would do better off without dairy in their life, and particularly cheese. And my wife comes home and she said, "We're going to change our diet." And I looked at her and I said, "You can change your address. I'm not changing a thing. I'm just fine the way I am." But she was perseverant. And I noticed that when she changed the kids' diets and her diet, that they were always suffering from various maladies and suddenly they weren't. And that bugged me a little bit because perhaps she might be right, and that was humbling. And I struggled with that, and I finally began to study. And I read what Ellen White had to say about it, and then I decided, we live in a scientific age. I firmly believe that science can vindicate everything Ellen White said, or it can take it apart if the scientist is going to be honest. And so I began to go through there, and I found out that there was absolute, perfect scientific validation for what the lady had to say. This is what I always come back to. This verse, 2 Corinthians 3, 16 and 17. Are we really the temple of God? How do we take care of our temple? There are so many ways that I have found in my life I have brought dishonor to God's temple. Eating at the wrong times of day, overeating, eating the wrong choices, not drinking enough water, not sleeping enough, being intemperate, working too hard and too long. Just so many ways I've done that. And so I've tried to put my life into this biblical setting. And, I thought, well, if any man defile the temple of God, him shall God destroy. And I'm like, maybe God doesn't even have to. Maybe you destroy yourself in the process. If you go back to 2 Chronicles 20:20 and put it into that setting. But if you're the temple of God and the temple of God is holy, why wouldn't you take better care of it than that? If Jesus were here and he was watching us do what we do, we would do things differently. But since he's not physically here and we don't feel eyeballs on the back of our head, we think we can do whatever we want with impunity, and it doesn't matter. But we serve a personal God who really cares, and he's in our life. He wants to be there, and he really wants to be part of it and to guide us and direct us in so many different ways. So what does Ellen White say? I found this is not an exhaustive search. It's how many quotes will fit on a screen. There's more, a lot more. But she said cheese should never be introduced into the stomach. Now, it was easy for me that when we changed our diet, I couldn't go back because I became very allergic. So allergic to dairy that almost I hear moo and I get sick. It really bothers me. Well, I stopped smoking and now I can't be around people with smoke. I think God has barred some of the doors behind me so that I can't go back because he probably knows how weak I might be. And I think that's part of when we talk about grace, that's God's grace. It's wholly unfit for food. That picture looks pretty cool, Somebody's got it all laid out there. Some chef made a really nice tray. And I thought, well, if it's really the horse manure on the boots, then this was not in effect any longer. Because yes, we do have better sanitary practices in food manufacturing. So that's what I really decided to find in the field of science, is to whether or not these things, because she said, take my writings and put them into time and place. So I began to look and see what I could find in science. And this is not an exhaustive study. We could go on for many hours, but I'm just going to give you some of the highlights. One of the proteins in cheese is called casein. If I say I'm allergic to cheese, everyone says, oh, you're lactose intolerant. No, I have a problem with the proteins. Lactose doesn't bother me, but the proteins really do. One of the dietary proteins is the casein in the cheese. One of the journals I was reading, and it says it's associated with cognitive impairment and neuroinflammation. You know who has a lot of neuroinflammation? Alzheimer's patients. And they're not the only ones. You see, what the deal is, you can have neuroinflammation for decades in your life, but eventually the scarring takes place. Understanding the potential impact of casein on the brain health is crucial in evaluation of the overall effects of cheese consumption, and that's only one of the components, one of the chemical components in cheese. The enzyme diacetyl is got a small enough molecular structure it can pass through the blood-brain barrier. I'm a little cautious about what I want going into my blood-brain barrier because there's some things I don't want in there. How many of you feel like you have more than sufficient brain power that you don't mind sparing a little bit? In the last 3 years, I've had 2 very severe auto accidents, and both of them gave me traumatic brain injury. I forgot who people were. I forgot memories, things. I couldn't do my job. I couldn't remember how to do the things in my job, fill out the forms properly. And I was in panic mode because my life had come to an end, is basically the way I felt. And little by little, it began to grow back and restore. And my life right now is like putting a puzzle together. The more pieces I get, the easier it gets, especially if you get the corners and the edges, you know where you're going to put the stuff. And it helps a lot. And I thought about, one day I said, people who are retarded, they must live in bliss. This is what I always thought, they lived in blissful ignorance. And I thought, now that I'm a retard, I'm not blissfully ignorant. I know very well what I lost, and I'm not a happy camper about it at all. I used to do advanced math in my head, and now I have to have a calculator to do simple functions. And if something gets really hard, I'll forget all the components of it. It's very, very frustrating to not have enough brain power and enough memory. And one of the things that we find when we're working with especially Alzheimer's patients and other forms of dementia, that the nerve synapses will begin to be impeded. The function will be impeded by what we call neuroplaque or inflammatory plaque. And it's basically a type of scarring. This material begins to form in there, and it impedes the ability for the information travel to go. And so you may have all kinds of great memories of people, places, things, science, information, how to do things, but the door gets glued shut and you can't access it anymore. And when I read this, I'm like, it's more than bacteria. And God knew this, and he told Ellen White, can you imagine if God would have tried to explain all this to her back in the 1800s? No one had ever heard of any of this. How would she have tried to explain this? She just said, don't do it, and it's not right. It's not right, but not good for you. And she left it at that. That's as much information as God had given her. And we've come a long way since there in our understanding of neuroscience. And we're beginning to realize that she was right all along. Inflammation, over and over and over, inflammation. You think of inflammation, you think of your back hurts, or your knee hurts, or you've got gout and your feet hurt or whatever. But we have all kinds of other opportunities for inflammation in the body. Inflammation in your soft connective tissues makes your joints hurt. Inflammation in your brain slows its function down and begins to diminish its ability to function. We're beginning to attribute a number of neurodegenerative conditions to neuroinflammation. And when it's chronic, it will continue to degrade your ability to process information, store information, and retrieve information. Cheese, of course, is high in cholesterol and triglycerides. It increases that. It's rich in saturated fats, which can increase your LDL a component of your cholesterol, which of course is something your doctor doesn't want to see you do. And of course, we'll automatically come back and say, well, I don't eat very much. But what does the panhandler have on his sign, his cardboard sign on the corner? Every little bit helps. So it all contributes. It adds up. It's cumulative. Some of the cheeses contain higher levels of triglycerides and fats than others, but definitely can contribute to your heart health issues. You ever heard of the gut-brain connection? I remember the first time my sister called me and she said, hey, there's a continuing education thing down here in my city. You really need to come to this. We both could use it, and I just feel it'd be a real benefit to both of our practices, and you should come down and let's go to this together. So I thought, well, why not? It'd be fun to do something with my older sister. She's 16 years older than me. We didn't go to school together. So yes, we're older, but we'll go to school together. And my daughter, who's a nurse practitioner, she's like, I want to go. So we all went together and we studied the gut-brain connection. And I was taken, as I went through that class, I was taken back over and over to the Bible. We always used to say, well, the biblical authors, they talked about, the yearning in their bowels and whatever. It was just the feeling. If you got stress or you got emotional or whatever, it gave you a little bit of a tummy ache or distress or whatever. But it's more than that. A lot of our emotions and how our brain functions is linked to the health of the gut. And we don't know very much about that at this moment, but if time lasts, we will learn more and more as time goes on. But scientists are telling us that the consumption of cheese can very easily disrupt the microbiota or the bacterial balance in your guts. So you can have bad bacteria and good bacteria, and what we really would like to have is at the bare minimum more good than bad. We'd like to have no bad. And one of the things that we run into all the time is people are not very careful about what they put in their mouth. It affects your gut-brain health in a big way. A lot of the stuff that people eat is very destructive to the bacteria, the friendlier bacteria. If you were to, say, have a strep throat and your doctor prescribed you some amoxicillin and you took it for 10 days and then if he's a up-and-coming doc, he's going to tell you, you take some friendly bacteria when you're done because you need to reintroduce, your friendly bacteria again. It's not just antibiotics. A lot of things that we consume on a daily basis can be very detrimental to our gut biome. Coffee, tea, soda pop, all the refreshing beverages people drink, alcohol. If you're eating a whole lot of, animal products, definitely going to throw your bacteria and populations in an unhealthy range. And when I was in practice, more gastrointestinal issues than you can imagine people suffer from. People walk around all day long, but they look like, they're dressed well and they have a smile on their face. But if you know the truth, they don't feel well. And all of this is a big front to try and make everybody leave them alone, not ask them what's wrong because they don't want to explain their tummy hurts. But they realize that this disruption of the gut can have definite effects on the implications for cognitive function and mental health. You look at how the Bible talks about health, and I didn't realize it did. I thought only the Spirit of Prophecy did. And I met this guy, and he came to visit our church. The reason he came is because his mother had some Bible studies when she was younger by an Adventist, and he found a Bible in the dumpster out behind the bar where he worked as a bouncer. and everyone called him Bubba. He was a great big boy, huge guy. And he kept coming to church, and I met him one day at church, and I said, Larry, did you get a new suit coat from your big brother or what? He said, oh, because it's so loose? He said, yeah, I found this Bible in the dumpster, and he said, and you knew that, but he said, what I didn't know is there's a health message in the Bible. And I'm like, there is? I was just new back into the faith. I didn't know. I was just reading the Spirit of Prophecy for the first time in my life. And I said, well, I found it in some of the Spirit of Prophecy books, but it's in the Bible? He said, yeah, you want me to show you? So this guy who's coming to the Adventist church to learn the truth is now giving me a Bible study on the health message out of the Bible. I had no idea any of that was in there. If I'd read it, it didn't really function. It didn't hit me. But he began to share that stuff with me. And he said, man, I'm losing weight and I'm feeling better. And he starts going on and on and on about this whole thing. And I look at the Bible, and the Bible has so much to say if we only paid attention and listened to it. Some of the mental issues that we can discover, anxiety. Seems like everybody wants to have some sort of an anti-anxiety drug these days. Everybody's anxious about everything. And as we go forward, men's health or their hearts failing them for fear. There's so much to be afraid of. Depression. Seems like more and more of our younger people are on antidepressant drugs these days. I like where it talks about neurodegenerative diseases as well, but the lifestyle factors such as diet, exercise, and stress can significantly impact that whole balance in there. And then this author that I was picking up on, a diet rich in fiber and fermented foods, and I'm not talking about alcohol, not talking about vinegars and things like that, not talking about those at all. We're just talking about, like, have you ever seen some of these fresh cultured things that have we call them happy bugs in there. They definitely can restore the gut biome and give you a lot better digestion in the future. Probiotics we all know about. Prebiotics are dietary fibers that the probiotics use to survive. You know, when Moses' mother decided that she'd have to put him in the river, she didn't just take him down there and throw him in the water. She put him in a little boat so that he had something to survive on and to survive with. And so when you put happy little bacteria into your digestion, the majority of those die because of the chemistry of your gut, unless you give them some way to survive. And the more fiber that you put in with them, the more that they can actually go in and penetrate into the woody parts of this cellulose fiber that's in the food, and then they survive that way and they get into the gut. And once they're into the gut, then they go to and colonize all of the little folds and crevices and cracks all through your gut. It's interesting to know that in a healthy immune system, that 85% of your immune-mediated response is in your gut. You know, we think it's my T cells, it's my B cells, it's my killer cells, it's the tumor necrosis factors, it's all these wonderful things cellularly, but none of those are told what to do without the gut. It's the gut chemistry that helps to initiate the response of your immune system. And if your gut's off, you don't have the good immune response. I was shocked when I began to read that 30-some years ago, and very little is said about it today, but science all knows that sort of thing. Down towards the bottom, changes in the composition of the gut microbiota can influence serotonin production. So if you can keep your bacteria in the right balances, you can keep sufficient serotonin so that you have a better sense of well-being. It influences your mood, emotional well-being, It can influence some of the other neurotransmitters. You know what dopamine is? Dopamine is the neurotransmitter of addiction. And we like it when we have more serotonin and less dopamine because our mind works better. All of these can influence your cognitive function and your emotional state. In cheese, you have something that's called casomorphin. When I was in a serious car accident, I was very grateful when the paramedics took me in on the stretcher and put me into the emergency room, and this nurse comes in with an injection of morphine and puts me out of my misery for a while. It was a really nice thing, but not a place I wanted to spend the rest of my life. And I remember they asked me about sending me home with some of the narcotics to facilitate my future pain relief at home. And I said, I don't want any. They said, do you want to live with this pain? I said, not necessarily, but if you give me those things, I'll abuse them. And I don't want access. I mean, right now, the state that I'm in, it's a great place. I really like it, but you better not, I can't be trusted with the key to this place. Don't give it to me. And they thought I was a little crazy, but they said, well, you know your own weaknesses, so you go home cold turkey. Casomorphin in cheese can do a lot of things. It can disrupt the balance of your neurotransmitters, but casomorphin actually begins to deaden the perception of your conscience, the frontal lobe of your brain. Because it's not just casein, it's morphine. And it is a sedative. And it slows down your thought processes and how you make your moral judgments. Now, I don't know if you remember, but when Satan used the serpent, he did because it was the most subtle of the creatures in the garden. It was the easiest way to deceive the people. You know, if he would have stood up in front of that tree with a cartoon costume on, with a red devil with a forked tail and a pitchfork and cloven hooves, I began to realize that so much of the things that Satan does to us are very, very subtle and nearly imperceptible. And when I begin to read about that things could be so seductive and so deceitful that even the very elect could be deceived, it began to make me think and began to make me question a lot. When I was younger, I thought I probably was the smartest person I knew. If there was a game, I'd figure out a way to win it. If there was a system that was supposed to hold things in check, I would game the system. And I would defeat the system to my advantage. And I just thought I was the most clever person in the world. I wasn't anywhere near as clever as the devil, the enemy. He is so much more intelligent than we are. We need to flee to Christ for protection. And I go back to 2 Chronicles. He gave us instructions to how to protect ourselves from the subtle deceptions. We're not likely to fall for a drug dealer. Some sketchy guy walks in here and he wants to sell you fentanyl pills. Probably not going to buy them, are you? Why? Because it's very obvious that that's not what you want to do. That's not good for you. It's not a safe move. It's very obvious. But that's not the kind of tools that the devil uses on Seventh-day Adventist Christians. He uses the little, subtle, imperceptible things that we can very easily miss. We have another chemical it's an amino acid called tyramine, found in your aged cheese, cured meats, wine. It changes the ability for the blood vessels in your brain to dilate possible and get the blood flow where it needs to be. See the word migraine headache up there? What happens in migraines? Your blood vessels constrict, right? And so if you begin to eat a lot of the foods that have this tyramine in it, can very slowly but surely narrow the openings and the passageways in your blood vessels, and you can begin to lose the blood flow in your brain. And Satan says, got them asleep. What kind of a fanaticism can we throw at them now? Because they're not awake. Let's trip them up on something. Also, we have something called tryptamine. Tyramine puts you to sleep. I remember when I was a teenager, everybody was talking about, we're tripping, man. Taking all these hallucinogenic drugs, you were tripping. In a very subtle way, tryptamine actually can cause your mind to trip a little bit. And it is slightly hallucinogenic. It's a precursor to the neurotransmitter serotonin as well. And it can definitely cause mood swings because your body has already got a system for producing the correct amount of serotonin, and it doesn't need that to be dysregulated in any way. Like I said to begin with, I don't want you to necessarily jump at something because I said it. I think you should go do your own homework. What I hopefully did was open a window that you can see into and realize that there's more out there than what we really understood. Kind of unpack some of the statements that Ellen White made. And I think that it's important because I have been deceived so many times in my life by the enemy. And then the results, they stick with you a long time. You make bad choices, bad decisions, and you just carry it. They don't just affect you, they affect your children, your grandchildren, people in your church, people in your community. They sometimes can cause such changes in your life that your powerful testimony that would do such a wonderful thing for somebody in your neighborhood or your community is withheld from them because you are now paralyzed in some way. So I think it's really important. Be a Berean. Do your homework. Do your study. Go look in the Spirit of Prophecy and see what she has to say. You know, we've got all these tools today that we can grab a laptop computer or a desktop and we can go into her writings and we can come up with things that back when I first started were really hard to find. You go to meetings and you took, excessive notes just so you had the information so you could go find the book and look it up for yourself. And now it's just at your fingertips. You could have it all in your fingertips in moments. Or you can go to an AI platform and ask them what Ellen White had to say about this stuff, and they'll give it to you faster than you can get it on Ellen White's own websites. Health is not just one thing. God didn't give us one law, He gave us 8. So many times we get all hung up on one thing, but we really need a positive balance in our life. It's not just exercise. It's not just sunlight. It's not just water. Those are great things, but it's that balance when you cover all your bases. Heavenly Father, we know that we're fearfully and wonderfully made, and we know that you made us. We didn't make ourselves. Consequently, we really should look to the manufacturer of this wonderful machine for an instruction manual that's properly designed to instruct us and teach us how to care for this equipment. We thank you that through the Bible and Spirit of Prophecy that we have this information. Maybe it's not in the detail that we hoped it might be, but we are told in Chronicles that if we trust what information you've given us, that we will physically and spiritually prosper. We ask that you will keep us balanced in our methods as we approach these topics. that we do not become fanatical or judgmental, that we don't leap when we need to be taking baby steps, that we're kind and thoughtful to others. We ask this in Jesus' name, amen.